Okay, so as I've been introduced, I work in the Agricultural Diagnostic Service Center. And today we're going to talk about collecting arthropod and disease samples for submission to me here in Hilo. One thing that Marisol wanted me to do this morning was kind of give you an overview and walk through an actual collection on the different hosts. But we thought it'd probably be a better idea to actually show you a crop because, as I've been saying, you know, if you're growing a crop, you'll find out that that crop's got its certain set of pests that like to feed on it. It's a good host for certain things. And so why not do papaya? Papaya is something that we probably all have in our home gardens, and they sure have a lot of problems. So it was easy to find samples of the problems, so that's why we chose it. So anybody growing papaya got in your garden? Yeah, it's pretty common. I think most of us have them in our yard. And they can either grow deliberately by ourselves or by birds spreading them around, so, or pigs. So yeah, I think, as I said, my specific role is insect and disease, so I wanted to give you just a few of the pests that are active on this crop. And so we'd go through the insects first and then diseases, and then I've got some actual samples that I was wanting to share with you as we went through it. So aphids, there's about 6 aphids that attack papaya in Hawaii. And this particular one, this green peach aphid, is very prevalent in all our gardens, okay? But I don't have a sample of that insect on papaya. And that's really important to take note of, and I'll explain to you later. So I want you guys to remember that, and we'll get back to it, okay? But this particular aphid has a worldwide distribution on many agricultural and ornamental host plants. In Hawaii, they actually give birth to live females. The females give birth to live young, sorry. There's no males' eggs because we don't have a freeze. And there are many natural predators and predators and parasites that attack aphids here. Wasps, and as well as ladybird beetles. And then we even have some entomopathogenic fungi that attack aphids here. So this is all ubiquitous in our environment. When it gets nice and rainy like this, these fungi tend to explode and they can just wipe out the entire population. And then when it dries out, you don't see it anymore. And the importance, of course, of this aphid is that it is a vector. And so vectors are like, we've heard a lot about that, right? With dengue and chikungunya and what's the Zika, right? That mosquitoes will vector these viruses. Well, aphids do the same thing to plants. And so aphids are our mosquitoes on the plants. And they will actually transmit the papaya ring spot virus, but they transmit it in a non-persistent manner. So that's important to know because some aphids will actually pick up the virus and it replicates in their body. And for the life of that aphid, it is a vector of the virus. So we'll see that in banana bunchy top. The banana aphid really likes banana. So if it lands on the banana, it stays there and it just keeps replicating that virus and spreading the virus. But because it likes it, it kind of stays localized, right? Well, remember I said earlier that I couldn't find any aphids on the papaya? And that's because they don't like papaya. Papaya got all that latex, right? So these aphids will get on it and feed on it, but they don't like it. So what they do is they simply go on and probe it, pick up the virus, and then they fly to the next plant and probe it. They don't like it, they fly to the next one. And so they're like little mosquitoes spreading the virus around. And that's why it became such a big problem on the island. Okay, so papaya thrips are actually a new pest in Hawaii, and it's pretty prevalent. And you can see that they do a lot of different damage on papaya. Here's an image of how tiny they are. They tend to be in the flower, and they feed not only on the flower, and they can cause bud abortion. Okay, so the flowers get distorted and they simply drop off. but they'll feed on the developing fruit and they'll scar it. And sometimes the fruit will abort. And they also feed on the foliage. So you see how the leaves there are really tattered? And the problem with that, of course, is that when the leaf canopy is reduced, you get sunburn. Well, the plants aren't photosynthesizing, so they're not very healthy and happy. And they don't provide any shade for the fruit, and you'll get sunburn. Okay, so it was first detected in '06. Two thrips on papaya. Sorry, I got ahead of myself with the picture. I was so excited. But you can see that they do cause quite a bit of damage. And whenever you have a reduction in the canopy, you get a reduction in photosynthesis, so the fruit's sweetness or the brix is reduced. So thrips actually have a rasping mouth part. So it's like a sickle, and they simply slice away at the tissue. And they kind of stay, they're cryptic, you know, they like to live down in the flower. And as that fruit is developing, they just kind of keep scratching at it. So as the fruit's expanding, they just keep feeding at the same level, and the fruit moves beyond them. And that's why you'll see scarring move over the surface of the fruit.
But that's still edible?
Oh yeah, no problem. Mm-hmm. So are the thrips. Yeah, they're quite tasty. But at any rate, that scarring there is very superficial. The fruit will continue to develop. Sometimes the fruit is distorted because the epidermis has been scarred, and so it no longer expands normally, so it may actually crack even if it's really severe. But usually when the fruit is that severely damaged, they abort, and they simply drop off when they're young. Okay? Okay, so there are phytophagous mites. So we all know mites are not insects. Mites are arthropods, more closely related to spiders. You guys all remember that? And spiders have how many legs? 8 legs? Okay, well, this mite actually throws all that out of the window because they only have 2 pairs of legs. They only have 4 legs. They're pretty interesting. If you look at what they look like, they're kind of tubular. The legs are up in the front along with the head, and then they have this fat abdomen that they kind of drag around with them. So you can actually see them, what they look like. This particular mite, there's 8 mites that are listed to attack papaya. This particular mite, this papaya rust mite, is an Erophyid mite. Okay, so the Erophyid mites are really an interesting group because, as I said, they've got the 2 pairs of legs as one. But the other thing is they tend to be very host specific. So if you think about an Erophyid that we all are really familiar with, it's like the the hibiscus leaf crumpling mite, how we get all that distorted, or the lychee russet mite, you get all that russeting on the leaf. So those are very different mites, and they only attack hibiscus, they only attack lychee, and this guy only attacks papaya. But for the most part worldwide, the Erophyid mites are the worst group, and that's because they can be viral vectors as well. And they cause a severe amount of damage because they're so tiny, 0.25 millimeters in length. And so they're not only hard to see, so they build up quickly, but they are hard to control because they are so tiny they can get under the leaf trichomes or the setae, the hairs on the leaf, and they can be hidden from anything you might apply to control them. Okay, so the damage they cause is an upward curling and bronzing of the leaves as well as the fruit when it's really severe. So this white peach scale was first found on our island in '97, and when it got in here, it was really dramatic because the entire field was white. It just looked like someone had gone with a paintbrush and painted all the trunks of the papaya trees in the field white. There was just so much scale. And so I picked off a little bit to show you under the microscope, but they will actually layer upon layer upon layer, sometimes 6 individuals deep, and simply put down their long stylet between each other and feed on the stem. So they actually take a lot of nutrients from the plant and can cause severe injury just by the sheer amount, or severe stress by the sheer amount of insect there.
What can you do for these?
Okay, so that's usually the second question. So First question is, what is it? Second is, what do I do? So there's 5 scale insects that attack papaya. It's an armored scale. So there's 2 types. There's a soft scale and an armored scale. And the armored scales tend to be really, really difficult to manage. Okay, so what do you do about it? Well, usually for scale insects, if it's your home garden, yeah, and you've got a few trees, I simply just wash mine off. I just simply go ahead and mechanically scrub them off. With water, sure.
Just water?
Yep. Get them off because these guys, they produce, so if we look at this picture here, we see here's the scale, and these little orange things are eggs, and the eggs actually sprout legs, and they become what we call crawlers, and they simply crawl. But they're lazy, and they don't like to leave home, you know, that they don't leave the nest kind of thing. They just settle down next to mom and put their mouth parts down into the stem and start feeding. So these tend to be a little bit more difficult to control than the green scale because there's so many of them and they're layered. So if you were to spray something, say you went with a pyrethrin or something like that, even a soap and an oil, all you would do is kill the top surface. And so mechanically removing them is a better way. But if you're commercial, that's a different story, and there's other strategies that we employ.
But even if you sprayed them off, wouldn't they land on the ground and then go back up again?
Okay, I think that's where I was going with that crawler, now that you reminded me. So right, what happens is these guys are no longer moving. They become sedentary, they just settle down and start feeding. It's the little crawlers that move around. So most of these insects, such as the scales, are tended by ants, okay? And that's because the scale insects, like aphids, like mealybugs, like whitefly, are insects that are feeding on the plant to get some protein. And so they are just sucking up as much juice as they can from that plant to get some protein out of it. But what they're getting is carbohydrates, right? Because the plant is photosynthesizing. And they've got to void that. So they simply void out all this sugary substance called honeydew. And that honeydew is what attracts the ants. And so the ants will actually farm them and they'll move them around. The armored scales tend not to do that as much as the soft scales. But at any rate, once you've washed those off and they're on the ground, they become food for insects like ants because they won't crawl back up.
Have you seen the peach scale on sweet pepper plants?
No. This, although you see here several hundred hosts, including stone fruits like peach, we've only really seen this on papaya here. Yeah, there are a number of other scales and whiteflies and things here in Hawaii that get onto peppers.
We have it on edible hibiscus too.
Okay, so that one's called a hibiscus scale. It looks just like it.
Okay.
Yep, same genus, Pseudo-Locaspis, but it's not the Pentagona. It's not the white peach. But they sure look alike, and they sure will coat it, right? Yep. And that guy gets onto other things. But this guy, we've only seen it on papaya.
Have you noticed anything on a bigger scale? What would you treat it with?
Well, so the other thing I should mention is earlier on the aphid, we talked about parasites and predators. Most of these scale insects are well managed by those in Hawaii, and so we tend not to recommend any toxic pesticide, any type of an OP or a general insecticide, because they tend to be more effective on the parasite and predator than on the scale. And so if you were to apply something, it would be like an insect growth regulator, something that would be safer on the biorationals.
Okay.
Yeah. But soaps and oils work pretty well on these guys, and that tends to be the recommendation for a home gardener rather than a pesticide. So Coleoptricum gliosporioides causes the disease Anthracnose. It's pretty common on papaya. If you raise any papaya in your yard with the rain we get, you'll see this disease. It's ubiquitous. It's just everywhere in the environment, and it affects a lot of different things, not only fruits, but ornamentals and vegetables. So it loves just about everything. And it's very typical, the damage it causes. There's a couple different sport disease symptoms. One we call chocolate spots. And then the other, of course, is the full-blown anthracnose, where you get that nice pink salmon-colored lesion. And that coloration is simply the seeds or the spores of the fungus, and each one is able to cause a new disease. So if you see something like this and the fruits are dropping, it's a good idea to pick that up, because all those spores simply splash with the rain back up into the tree and cause new infections. And this particular organism, those spores will germinate. They send a germ tube down into the flesh of the fruit, the green fruit, and it sits there. And it just sits there until you pick it and bring it inside, because the plant is producing phytochemicals when it photosynthesizes. But as soon as you pick that fruit, it's no longer producing these phytochemicals, and the fungus has the advantage, and it starts to rot your fruit. So people will say, it looked fine on the tree, but when I bring it into the house, it starts to rot, and that explains why it does that. So sanitation is really important to control this disease.
Is it safe to eat those?
You know, this actually, it's pretty interesting. If you go ahead and pop the fruit, it'll come out as a whole piece with all the mycelium mat. Have you guys noticed that? But so yeah, you can certainly eat around it. The mycelium, of course, will be spreading into the flesh, and you can tell if it's starting to rot. But yeah, this one, maybe the other half of the fruit is edible still. But yeah, you wouldn't want to eat all that fungus. It'd probably give you a sore stomach. Powdery mildew. This particular organism is one of those fungi that doesn't need rain to cause disease. It just needs temperature and high humidity to favor its development. So we actually see this problem in greenhouse grown or in Kona, where it doesn't get as much rain. But in situations like that, it can become quite debilitating and significant in the amount of damage it causes. It's also an obligate parasite, which means that it only grows on papaya tissue. It won't grow on anything else. So if you don't have any papaya for a while, you've broken the cycle of the disease, and you'll be able to get away with no disease the next time.
How long?
Well, it depends on if your neighbor's growing papaya, right? Because they're wind-blown spores, wind and rain, yeah. Yeah, no winter here, shucks. Okay, so black spot is also a very common disease. And this is probably one that we all see, and I see it even on the fruit in the market. And that's because it is very, very difficult to manage. So on the foliage, it causes very characteristic spotting. Yeah, very characteristic. And on the fruit as well. So just like in the images here, it was found on Maui in 2001. It's very host specific. And when you have severe infections, it can cause leaf drop. Fruit infections are very restricted, so you can tell it's not that anthracnose. And it doesn't really enter beyond the epidermis or the upper layers of the epidermis. So the fruit is entirely edible. It's just a blemish that's unattractive. And what's really interesting is that, you know how we were talking about plants having different insects and diseases associated with them? Well, fungi and insects all have their own associations too, right? Isn't nature grand? And this fungus here, the white growth, is what we call a hyperparasite. So that fungus is actually feeding on the black fungus, the Sporosporium. So we have some hyperparasitism going on when the weather is just right, and you'll see it. And then the infection rate drops.
So would you suggest if we want to find things like these disease, and we put it in a black bag and throw it away someplace instead of putting it in compost or whatever? Right,
that's a good point. Unless you're actively composting, and we've got some really good literature on that website Alyssa shared, so that you're heating your compost thoroughly, getting it up to temperature. You want to get it up high enough that you kill the fungus. Unless you're doing that, just putting it in a mulch pile will do nothing except provide disease when you move it to another spot. Fruit and foot rot. I tried to only pick the real common bad ones, okay? There's a lot more, but so exciting to not choose everybody. But Phytophthora palmivera is a very big problem. In fact, it was so severe back in the 50s that it wiped out whole plantations. And this organism actually is what the Phytophthora infestans, another species, what caused that great potato famine in Ireland way back when. So it can move really quick. You know, when you have a rainy week like this, that's what Phytophthora loves. It's prevalent during rainy periods. It likes the wind and the rain to aid in its dispersion. So it can cause severe decline and death because of root rot in poorly drained areas. You'll get this type of foot rot and the trees just simply fall over. And they are very characteristic in their white mycelia on the fruit. And this is one of those diseases that in a couple of days it will take out a tree. It simply moves really quick into the fruit, and right there you can see it moves right into the trunk of the tree, or when the fruit drops, it simply rots out the base of the tree. So Phytophthora in Latin means plant destroyer, so it will really just wipe it out quickly. Rootknot nematodes, so they're actually interesting in that they're parasitic worms, microscopic worms, and they look like little worms here. And that's the juvenile stage, the younger stages. As they enter into a root, the female swells up and gives their characteristic knotting of the roots, which is why we call them root knot. And when the heavy infestations will actually cause the plant to lose vigor because those roots aren't functioning normally. So you can actually see a plant start to wither in the heat of the day, and then at night it looks okay again. That's a good indication that you've got Rootknot nematodes. Oh, and I have samples of what that looks like here on these roots.
Can they actually kill a seedling?
It would be a very slow process to kill it.
Slow death,
Yeah, very slow.
like a decline.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay.
Slow death, yeah.
Yeah, a real slow death. Usually what happens is these openings in the root allow for fungal infections, and that would take out the plant.
That's right, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And then finally, a papaya ring spot virus. So this virus is a member of the potivirus group, which is transmitted by aphids, and as we said earlier, in a non-persistent manner. And so we remember the importance of that now is that the aphids don't like papaya, so they simply just spread the virus and move on. So this was such a severe outbreak, it crippled the industry in the 90s. I can remember fields that looked like this. And so the whole industry moved to Hamakua. I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but they moved it out there to try and get away from the virus. And unfortunately, they grew their seedlings in Puna and brought it to Hamakua. So within a few years, they wiped out their Hamakua plantation as well. So it leads to distortion, chlorosis. It's a mosaic pattern in the foliage. I have that here. That's this guy. Yeah. And circular green spots on the fruit. I can also remember when those were in the market, and that's what we were buying to eat. It wasn't very sweet, but that's all they had. And of course, that leads to reduced bricks or sugars. So I did want to include some references that are available online through that website Alyssa shared, and you notice it's free. Not much in life is free anymore, but these are still free. You paid for it with your tax dollars. And then these are some websites in Hawaii that are regarding plant pests that are available also online. So if you are going to start doing your own research online, I warn you, don't go to .org and .com, go to a .edu type website. California, Florida, Texas are good websites if we don't have it here in Hawaii because the environment is somewhat similar. And they tend to send us...
Florida, University of California.
They tend to send us all their pests anyway, so they tend to have what we need. Okay, well, I thank you very much for your attention.